All right, good afternoon, everybody. We are recording and we're here to talk about capital solutions for cooperatives. My name is Kyle White. I'm the Director of Education for Cooperatives First, and today I'm joined by my colleagues Elliot Bridgewater and Corinne Rempel, who will be presenting during today's session. For those of you not familiar with Cooperatives First, I just want to give a quick overview. We're a nonprofit organization that's based out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and we work across Western Canada. Our mandate is to raise awareness of cooperatives and to support entrepreneurs seeking to start cooperative businesses. We're funded by Federated Cooperatives Limited on behalf of the cooperative retailing system, and because of their contributions, we can provide all of our supports for free. Since being created in 2016, Cooperatives First has helped create over 130 new cooperatives. We want to hear from all of you where you're joining from, so please do take a minute and in the chat, let us know your name, where you're joining from, and the organization you represent. I'd like to start this meeting in a good way by acknowledging that we're located on Treaty 6 territory, the home of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dene, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis nations. We acknowledge that this land was not ceded, but that the purpose of the treaties was to ensure the land would be shared. We're joined in this webinar by people from all across Turtle Island, so I invite you to acknowledge the peoples and ancestors of the place that you call home in your own way. Indigenous people have been cooperating in these territories for thousands of years, and it is through this cooperation that all of our communities will continue to thrive. For today's webinar, we'll start by hearing from Corinne, then we'll hear from Elliot, and then I've got a few questions prepared for both of them as a panel, and then we'll open it up for questions from you folks. I'll do a quick introduction to get us started. We're joined by Elliot Bridgewater, who's the founder of Omican Bridgewater LLP. He's a respected speaker, educator, and advocate for co-op development. He teaches at University of Calgary, is a member and lawyer with the Alberta Law Society, and a director of Calgary Co-op, one of North America's largest consumer co-ops. We're also joined by Corinne Rempel, who's the executive director for the Alberta Community and Cooperative Association, and one of the founding members of the Community Capital Solutions Co-operative. First up, Corinne's going to provide us with an overview of the Community Capital Solutions Co-operative. So Corinne, over to you.
Thank you. So CCS is what we've settled on as an acronym, was developed with funding from Prairies Canada and the support of key partners, recognizing that communities, both urban and rural, need accessible, locally driven solutions to raise and manage capital for critical businesses, housing, and infrastructure. Organizations such as Service, PV Mart, Cooperators, Cooperatives First, Van City, Prairies Canada, BCCA, and ACCA have all played a role in the development of CCS. What drove my interest in this project was the potential of a real-world solution to economic challenges that communities are facing across Canada, and in particular, rural communities. So it was kind of a bit of a passion project, which is why I stepped into this opportunity. And I also particularly like the people that were surrounded the project. So I want to acknowledge individuals like Dan Oler, who's here in the room, but he's not here up at the front today. Elliot, and even yourself, Kyle, who've been tireless advocates for the investment co-op model, dedicating time and expertise. And I know this to be true of Elliot and Dan, who've invested a fair bit of personal expense and time and energy to help communities unlock new economic opportunities through the investment co-op model. While the co-op developers, like Dan and Elliot, do the heavy lifting, my role is to create a spotlight and shine on the model, shine on CCS, investment co-ops, and kind of capture and gather the powerful stories that emerge from this work. One of the recent steps is, and also a great to do off my back, was the launch of the CCS's new website, Community Capital's communitycapitalsolutions.ca. And quite proud of the work that we've got, and an opportunity for creating a central hub for communities seeking support and a platform to promote this innovative model. I am looking forward towards this conversation today. I'm meeting with the individuals that are here in the room and exploring how we can continue to expand investment cooperatives as a powerful tool for local economic resilience. And just before I turn off my mic, I know, Kyle, you had asked for people to kind of in the comments to share who they were and where they're from. I'd also like to say send two invitations. If you get a chance, please visit the website, which I will put in the comments in a minute. But I'd also love to know if in the chat here, whether it's just out of curiosity that you're here, if you have a community maybe project that you're looking to build, or if it's just something that's passionate for you as a co-op developer. So thank you for your time.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Corinne. And I'm just doing a quick scroll through the comments or the chat right now, and Ken confirmed from Vancouver to St. John's, we are coast to coast today. All right. Elliot, we'll go to you next to give us a good overview of investing in co-ops, raising money, and some of the work that CCS is doing.
Great. Thanks, Kyle, and thanks, Corinne. Yeah, and thanks everybody for being here. It's so inspiring to see so many different cooperators across the country, and I even noted somebody from Zimbabwe here. So we got the world here too. It's been a bit of a journey working in this space for me. I've been a lawyer for 10 years and probably getting close to half of that, been working closely with co-ops in various shapes and sizes and sectors across Canada. So we worked in BC and Alberta and New Brunswick and Saskatchewan, with our partners in Quebec. And my partner is Bill Omakin. He's in the US and he works in Wisconsin, but across the country down there and on the Board of Farm Credit, which is a massive co-op as well. And so we're actually expanding into the US as well. We're trying to unite cooperators across North America and the world. I've done some work with ICA in Latin America as well, working with eco-tourism co-ops and economic development initiatives down there with the ICA. But today we're focused on the work of investment co-ops in particular. Investment co-ops are near and dear to my heart because they're really foundational in terms of what I think the co-op model is about. The co-op model is about democratic ownership of economic development. That means ownership by and for communities of businesses and the economic engines that create resilient and successful economic growth in local economies. And so I think that because investment co-ops put that front and foremost, that is capital ownership, investment in business, management of business and local opportunities, that it is kind of an essential part of the co-op movement, and one maybe that over the generations we've taken for granted a little bit. And so investment co-ops call on us to educate ourselves about what it means to be an owner, what it means to be actively engaged in your local economy at the level of ownership. So when I say that, I work with several investment co-ops across the country, but I've even worked with one in my own backyard, which is Water Valley, Alberta, which is just north of Cochrane, about a half an hour in the foothills. And we started a co-op because we see that our downtown of Little Water Valley, which is really just a corner with a hardware store and a library and a saloon and a community hall, is starting to lapse into a lack of investment. The hardware store is great. It's got a ton of character, but its floor is almost like a topographical map in terms of how uneven it is, and it's starting to show signs of wear. And so we wonder, in 5 years from now, what is our community going to look like if we don't get a capital infusion in these local pillars of the economy? And will it cease to exist? Well, if we just let it lapse, can we afford to wait and see if somebody's going to swoop in and take on a business that maybe at best right now looking at breaking even or being in the plus a few tens of thousands of dollars? It's not exactly a gold mine, but it is essential to the community, and it probably could be improved, especially if you had loyal customers that also owned the business. So that's where we look at investment co-ops as being, potentially a keystone in local economies. We started our little co-op, and we were able to raise about $250,000 to purchase the local hardware store. And we're still working through that acquisition with the local owner and working on some reasonable expectations in terms of a transaction. But the fact that we were able to raise from perfect strangers this kind of money through being transparent, having open conversations, inviting critical questions and commentary from our neighbors, and putting basically the deal in front of them and saying, hey, this is what we believe we need in our community. Do you agree? And if so, would you be willing to support it? And we were surprised, I think pleasantly surprised to see how many people came forward and said, you know what, this is a great idea. Whether from all walks of life, whether it was recent transplants or it was ranchers that have been here for generations. They saw the need and they saw the potential here. So and I think that story is pretty it's pretty common. There's a lot of communities around the country and around the world that are struggling with a lack of investment, and nobody's coming to save the day. No big business or no angel investment consortium is going to come and blow apart downtown and make something, some glistening streets of gold, paved with gold town. We have to do it ourselves. And I think that's really the core of economic development when we look at what has been resilient in our especially our rural communities. It's cooperatively founded often, right? When you look at the credit unions, when you look at the grocery stores, when you look at in our province, like the UFAs, United Farmers of Alberta movement, and the grain cleaning co-ops, the agricultural co-ops, all of these things were started by regular people for the local economy to create a level playing field and to make things more accessible and to improve their own small businesses. So when we start looking at ourselves as owners of our local economic development, that's when the co-op model can be so powerful. But it takes some education. It takes understanding, what is capital? What is it? What is making an offering, a securities offering? What is a security, for instance? How do we share profit fairly when we have it? What does the co-op model afford us in terms of sharing that profit fairly and equitably among owners? And also, how do we enter into good deals? We need on the other side of the table a business owner or property owner that is looking to make a fair deal and also believes in community. And you need to be savvy when making those deals, because not every deal is created equally. And you are selling this offering ultimately to your neighbors, and you want something that is mitigating risk in terms of an acquisition. Let's say if you're buying real estate, or if you're buying a business, or even if you're starting a new business. So you want to make sure you've done your due diligence there. So oftentimes we focus on just the raising of the money, but equally, I think it's very important, if not equally, even more so, looking at the transaction. Where's the destination of that money? Because often it's actually not as difficult as we think it is. There's some rules and there's some tricks to raising capital effectively. But it's also on the other side of the table is that destination going to be a good place for that capital, right? Are we looking at this objectively? Have we done our due diligence? Do we have somebody on the other side of the table that is proposing something that's fair? So I think those both sides, but yeah. So I think that's why we got into it, though, is we realized that the core of co-ops is an understanding of ownership, the entitlements, but also the obligations of ownership, and doing that in a democratic fashion. That's what our society is built on, and we think democracy, when we respect our fellow citizens, our fellow community members, when we can put transparency and accountability first and foremost, the co-op model is incredibly powerful historically, and it's being proven today. But it's on us to make sure that it continues into the future as a robust model. And I think a lot of that is the kind of learning that you need to have when you're looking at doing an investment co-op, but any co-op, for any co-op that's trying to raise capital. So that I'll leave it at that there for now, and I'm happy to take questions. In terms of my participation with CCS, I should note, we're trying to bring these services in a comprehensive way. So we're working with Cooperatives First. Cooperatives First is an excellent resource for cooperative education and cooperative formation. What we do is we try to take it to the next step. What are the securities rules and regulations that you need to comply with? What's the kind of offering that's appropriate for your scale of business and your aspirations? And also on the deal side, what does that look like? Have we done our due diligence? Do we have the right agreements in place? Have we structured the negotiation to a closing of an acquisition or start of a new business appropriately and legally and a way that mitigate risk, but is also transparent to our members and investors? And then we bring that, a big element in between those two things is the communications, the public relations. How are we dealing with our prospective members and investors and community members in a way that's transparent and accountable, that's compliant with securities laws around disclosures and promoting securities offerings, but is also getting the word out in a way that's effective and is effectively communicated and is likely to generate a good conversation in your community and in your network and generate interest and hopefully a successful offering. So we're trying to build a network of cooperative investment co-ops and service providers in a cooperative way, so that even policymakers and legislators see this as a movement, and we're not reinventing the wheel in every community in which we operate. So there's shared best practices, there's shared resources and services, but there's also an understanding that this is something bigger. This is a movement, and we can generate a lot of momentum in terms of getting some of the movement on the policy and legal side that we probably need to make this model even stronger. So I'll end there with questions, and yeah, I appreciate the time.
Awesome. Appreciate that. Thanks so much, you two. Really informative, really good overview of a really great initiative. It's pretty exciting to see it starting to grow. As I mentioned in the chat, if you do have questions for Elliot or Corinne, please feel free to enter them in the chat, or maybe use the raise hand function or give me a wave. I do want to add one little caveat to that. Just be mindful that if you're looking for specific legal advice, this might not be the best forum for that. It might be best to book a meeting with Elliot. So I would recommend just keep the question a little bit more general rather than ultra technical. I'm going to go ahead and kick things off with our first question. Feel free, either of you, to answer this one. What would be some of the steps that you recommend a co-op work on before contacting CCS? What are things people should have already done before they engage with the co-op for some services?
Well, I guess I can take that. I think the work that Cooperatives First is doing is an incredible resource. So, and it's very accessible. So I think some basic cooperative 101 training and a basic business plan, at least getting that down. What are we trying to accomplish here by coming together? And I think Cooperatives First can help with both of those sides. And what is a co-op model? Is it appropriate for what we're trying to do? And if it is, can work through the initial steps of forming a co-op. They're all formed in a similar way, although it may need a little bit more specialization once you get to the capital structuring side of an investment co-op, and that's maybe where we tie in. But I always caution people against putting the cart too far in front of the horse. That means, some people can get pretty enthusiastic about the model in the abstract. So, and I can definitely as a lawyer, so I relate, but it's easy to get to focus on the model and not necessarily the mission or the end goal, and that can be a mistake, and it can lead to you spinning your wheels a little bit too much. So a focus on the business. What do we need to accomplish here? And is it the way is the best way to accomplish this through democratic enterprise, democratic ownership by communities. It's not every business that's going to be appropriate for, but it can be incredibly valuable and strong in the right application. So getting those two parts, at least the basics hashed out, with a service provider like Cooperatives First, I think is a vital resource to start down that road with a group. So getting together a group of individuals, like-minded, whether it's neighbors, friends, business associates, colleagues, and understanding kind of what do we need, also what kind of talent do we need in the room to have a good conversation, a robust conversation about how to get this done. So that's the basics.
Can I jump back the bus up just a little bit? And I'm going to use advice that Kyle has given before, and he always says a co-op is not one person. So have a group of 2 or 3 or more who are, you know, willing to link arms with the project. And I'm going to give Cooperatives First another shameless plug. And this is not a paid endorsement. Co-opcreator.ca, you know, there's some great resources if you don't know about the co-op model. You could also check with your provincial associations. But anyways, back to the co-opcreator.ca, there's some great resources there to learn a little bit more about the co-op model, and, you know, is it even something that is interest. So depending on where you are, there's some great pieces there to support your journey.
Awesome. Thanks, you two. Good answers there. We've got a few questions in the chat. From Hannah, can you talk a little bit more about the services that CCS is offering, such as the investment banking support?
Sure, I think I can. When we talk about investment banking, we're really talking about kind of financial operations and management, and those are largely a policy problem to sort out in terms of how to financially manage the co-op. So that's kind of it's kind of policy and law aspect of things. And that's where what we mean by kind of investment banking services. We're not a bank, and we're not going to open an account. We can assist. For instance, my law firm can assist with providing a trust account for offerings, and that would be some, I guess, banking associated services that we can assist with, and that just helps build trust through the offering process, that you're working with a law firm that will hold funds in trust until the securities offering closes, at which point then it's transferred to the investment co-op for the business purpose associated with the securities offering, which would have been articulated in your subscription agreement and term sheet likely.
Awesome. Thanks, Elliot. We've got a question from David. David asks what the differences are between a worker-owned cooperative and an investment cooperative. Do you give up some decision-making power to investors if you're in an investment cooperative, or if you're raising capital from investment?
Well, that's a very good question. So worker co-op is primarily focused on serving workers who are members, right? So the way in terms of capital, how that's set up is that workers will, by a formula that's negotiated between them, work out a patronage formula, so a patronage dividend formula that will benefit members in proportion to their contribution, however that's defined, of work. So it could be hours, it could be role, it could, in some senses, be seniority, but that's how a worker co-op gets. And then, of course, as you members, you are voting in a board of your peers, and you are governing and owning as workers, and part of that is proportionate benefit. Now, as a worker co-op, you can still, in some senses, be an investment co-op, or you can have an investment component, right? So the focus is on workers, But you can have investment shares as well, and you could make those investment shares open to workers, just workers, so that they could use, say, a part of their paycheck could go to investment shares, right? To issuing investment shares, and those shares can be held as a form of their investment in the company or in the cooperative, and then that can be used for business purposes that they agree upon around the board table. But it can also be outside investment. So you could also attract investors, accredited investors, so wealthy people, family and friends, so with people that you know closely, or you can do different kinds of securities offering raises to the public with the appropriate regulatory requirements. So that's kind of the worker co-op is more focused on workers, obviously, and worker governance, but can have a significant investment component. And that could be for the workers or for the public or a bit of both. And you can structure your capital accordingly through different share classes and series. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. But it's kind of primarily what you're focused on. There's always a bit of a dichotomy in co-ops between membership, which is the voting rights, one member equals one vote, and investment shares. And investment shares typically, not always, but typically are where you would provide certain privileges to investment shares, but no voting. So you would say, okay, well, if we get if we're profitable, then we pay out dividends first to investment shareholders according to whatever our formula, and then we go to patronage. If we sell, then investment shares, or if we liquidate, we have to dissolve, then investment shareholders will take first and then members. And we might structure investment shares to be floating, non-par value, so that they appreciate with the fair market value of the business, whereas membership shares as a nominal amount will stay at $150 or whatever. So they'll stay fixed. So, but you can play around with that according to the best interests of your particular cooperative.
Awesome. That's a great overview, Elliot. David has one follow-up question that we'll go to, which is, do you have some examples of worker co-ops with investments? I can give at least one. There's not that many worker co-ops in Canada. There's only a couple hundred. La Siembra Workers Co-op out of Ottawa is one good example. They create the Camino chocolate brand, but they have preference shares available for non-members that want to support their work. Any others you want to note, Corinne or Elliot?
Well, I've worked with a number of worker co-ops. They all have, a lot of them have investment in some form or another. Now, investment is not just equity, can also be debt, right? So there's most worker co-ops that I've worked with have taken on some kind of investment. Usually it's the dyed-in-the-wool financial institutions investment, or some impact funds also providing loans, and that's fairly common for worker co-ops in certain spaces. I'm trying to think off the top of my head for other models with more equity involved, but I can't come up with one right now. But yeah, there's definitely been a few that I've worked with that are worker co-ops that have investment. It's just important to understand that the unique capital structure of co-ops in your jurisdiction in particular, because in different provinces, there's slightly different tweaks on capital structure. It's one of those differences that can be significant depending on the province you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I don't see any other questions in the chat. If folks do, please do fire through the chat or give a wave. I'll go for my prepared questions. Can you give a sense of how much does it cost to do this kind of raising money, or even is there a certain size of co-op or equity pool that that a co-op should try and raise to make this worthwhile? Is there too little money or too much money? What do you guys think about the scale that a co-op should aim for?
That's an excellent question, and like most in law, the answer begins with "it depends," which is not satisfying at all. But I'll provide you a little bit of context. So depends where your co-op is at in terms of scale right now, right? So how much money does your co-op need to raise, and how many assets does it have to raise that money? That's gonna, and also liabilities. That mix of things is going to help you determine what kind of capital raise is most appropriate for your co-op. So if you're a startup, for instance, you're just getting started and you don't have any assets, but you don't have many liabilities either. You may want to look at doing a quick private issuer raise. So that would be a raise from your family and friends, close business associates, people that you know very well, and perhaps some in your circle that are wealthy individuals, accredited investors, up to a maximum of 50 beneficial owners. So that's up to a maximum of 50 members or investment shareholders or a mixture of both. But there is a cutoff at that 50, but it's very economical in terms of legal costs and very straightforward to do that kind of raise. So that's where you can, and I would target, you're probably not going to raise much more than $500,000 on that. You might be able to raise $1 million if you've got that rich uncle, or two or three. But that's kind of in the $250,000 range often. And you can get that, through $2,500 here and there, 5,000, 10,000. You can get enough there to generate that initial liquidity to start doing what you need to do to do kind of your core business, whatever that's going to be looking like. If you're more established and you're ready and you've got some operations that are ongoing and you're looking at something like an offering that's more in the millions, in the low millions, let's say 2 to 10, then you might want to look at something that's a little more public, like an offering memorandum. An offering memorandum allows you to, with a fairly robust but not that long disclosure document, and as long as you keep to that disclosure document, it'll allow you to go out in the public and actually market this a little bit more thoroughly. And that's where you may find that you get cast a broader net and you're able to raise more money. But you have to be careful that there. So the private issuer raise is very economical from a legal standpoint, and you don't need to have audited financials, for instance. When you get up to the higher, like more of a public offering, all of a sudden there's more disclosure requirements, audited financial requirements. So that means, it can be $10,000 a year for audited financials. You need to have more robust administrative capacity for these kinds of raises, right? So that's where you have to, and then you're gonna have to manage that, right? If you have 200 members all of a sudden, you're gonna have to manage that year to year. That takes some costs and effort. So if the thought is to do it all pro bono at a board level, just be aware that can be exhausting over time. So you need to have, then that's where you're going to need to be able to, manage your investment so that you have enough coming in. And that's how you structure the deal as well, right? So you don't want to get too over your skis on raising a whole bunch of money and then having not that much coming in, because you'll eventually exhaust people. But yeah, so there's different scales, different kinds of raises, types of raises at different kind of scales of organization. So you have to kind of figure out where you're at and what you can do. There's also, if you have a bunch of real estate risk with no mortgages, you can debt financing very, very easily, obviously. But I always encourage in these conversations to think about prioritizing equity, because equity ownership is really, I think, more what co-op is designed to raise from amongst many in the community to make a stronger whole.
Awesome. Great answer there, Elliot. We have a couple questions in the chat that are folks who have a specific business idea and are asking if that could work or if they could get support for it. I think in those cases, just shoot Cooperatives First or CCS an email. In most cases, we can make things work. But yeah, I would recommend get in touch with us. We'll help build out a plan and figure out how to move any of those ideas forward. We have a question from David. I live in Maui, Hawaii. You lucky duck. Can I be a client and get support from your organizations if I'm not in Canada? At Cooperatives First, I'll answer from our perspective and then go to CCS. You can use all of our online tools and resources. Most things are designed for Western Canada, but a lot of the concepts behind cooperatives are transferable. But our advisory services are limited to people that reside in Western Canada or register federally even. Elliot, Corinne, does that apply to you guys as well?
I was going to say likely, but you know, for a trip to Hawaii, that there could be things considered.
For us, we do provide services to U.S. clients. Like I did mention, my partner is a U.S. attorney. I am writing the U.S. bar in less than a month. And so hopefully I'll also be a U.S. Attorney fairly quickly. And that is, you know, and my partner is quite quite a well-respected cooperator and cooperative attorney. So if you do want to talk about the U.S. assistance, then we can perhaps provide some services. There's other attorneys and attorney networks that we do work with in the U.S. as well that may also be able to assist. So if you want to send me an email, we can talk about maybe what your needs are and what resources we're aware of to help, because there is other networks as well in the U.S. that are fairly strong.
I did provide the contact form in the chat for CCS, so that's a quick place to get a hold of Elliot as well.
We'll share that as well when we email out the recording, just so folks have that in the top of their inbox.
Thank you, Kyle.
Question from Kieran. If Worker Co-op was successful in British Columbia and thought other provinces could benefit from the same services, how would it go about starting co-op branches in each provinces? And what would be the steps to incorporating federally? Ooh, good question. Do you guys want to take that one?
I can take it. There's a couple different ways to do that, at least a couple. You could start a federated co-op. So you could start a federation, a cooperative of cooperatives. So you could start co-ops in each province, basically, and then have a national federation, which could be incorporated federally. We can do federal incorporations here in Canada through the Canada Cooperatives Act. But you can also extra provincially register in other provinces in which you're going to be doing business. So it depends what you mean by branches, right? Because branches can be internal, as in they're in the same co-op, or they could be different co-ops that each have membership in kind of a mothership of a federation, if you will. And that can be also what you refer to as branches. So you kind of have to do a bit of an org chart, an organizational chart, to determine what you need in that sense. Keeping in mind that sometimes less is more, especially when you're smaller scale. Having a dozen different co-ops that you're now administering, if they're not already kind of up and running in some form or fashion, may be tricky and expensive to administer. So yeah, that's the basic. It's definitely possible. There's a few different ways to do it. You have to figure out what's the most suitable organizational design for you. And I would encourage you to develop an org chart to do that.
Awesome. We have a question from a colleague in Toronto. Their challenge at this time is mentoring support from other organizations. Do we have a recommendation for resources that we'd recommend? I'll maybe answer this one real quick and then hand over to Elliot and Corinne. Cooperatives First is limited to Western Canada, but I recognize we've got lots of folks from the East here. Again, all of our online tools, resources, and education, definitely check it out. It's pretty transferable. Organizations like Cooperatives and Mutuals Canada, the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation, the Ontario Co-op Association, or any provincial co-op association in the East would have pretty similar resources and would definitely have good recommendations for co-ops, co-op developers, consultants to work with. Elliot, Corinne, I think CCS is able to work across Canada. Any other recommendations or insights from you two?
No, I think you've covered them all, unless Elliot, you can think of one.
Yeah, I would say try to contact and develop relationships with the association closest to you, perhaps with the National Association. There are cooperators and cooperative developers across the country. It's sometimes a bit of a looser network or informal network, but you should be able to get in touch with some, as you say, mentors, if you kind of put a little bit of work into developing the relationships with representatives of the association. They should be able to put you in touch, and there's definitely people all across the country that are passionate about this model and willing to devote some time to helping new cooperators learn the ropes.
Yeah. So, one comment in the chat that I'm going to turn into a question. Dan Oler puts out there about the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation helping folks invest in investment cooperatives through RRSP and TFSA contributions. Can you give us a little bit of an oversight or overview of what that program does and how that works, Elliot?
I can, but Dan can probably do a better job of it, actually. But maybe I'll try to give a little bit of an overview. So that's so what it's a bit of a nebulous area of law, but the long story short is that you can use your RSPs to invest if you have self-directed RSPs. But what it requires is a trustee, a trust company. So what's happened with is the Canadian Worker Co-op Federation has set that up, set that relationship up, and the basically the paper trail that you need to use in order to use a trust company to make those investments of your self-directed RSP. So you can use your retirement savings to invest locally, a part of your portfolio, should you so choose. And actually, there are now platforms such as DealPoint that have incorporated that function in as well, that we are working with a little bit more closely these days on at least one of the larger offerings that I'm using, and I've been somewhat impressed by the fact that they've come up with a number of different options now for those trust companies, and it's digital. They're not the cheapest to use, but if you do have something the size of an offering memorandum that you're thinking of, it might be something to also look into.
Awesome. Excellent. Another question I've got here. Can you share a couple of success stories that you've worked with, Elliot, of some successful capital campaigns where folks created a co-op?
Yeah, well, I'm currently working with Homestead in Edmonton. They're making they've successfully actually launched a offering memorandum to purchase the old CKUA building in downtown Edmonton. And so they're currently and they've got on their board the former mayor of Edmonton and some pretty prominent players in Edmonton, and they're using the investment co-op model to raise around $9 to $10 million. And for a pretty kind of legendary building, iconic building in downtown Edmonton. So that's been you know, very engaging to work with. I've worked with solar on solar investments up north that have been joint ventures that have included large equity raises. I've worked in smaller communities when they're purchasing real estate. You know, Vermilion. We worked with Vermilion and set up Vermilion. They purchased a larger commercial building in downtown Vermilion, and they worked with a local cheesery to move into that as their first tenant. So they brought in a successful business that was out of town into town, so they can have a little bit more retail presence, but also they can take the next step with their business. Those are a couple examples. I work with, it's not necessarily an investment co-op, although it kind of is, Battle River Railway, which is a spectacular story. It's very cool. A group of local farmers, it's northeast of Edmonton. They purchased a rail line that was going to be defunct from CP. And they rehabilitated it, and they're now using it, and it's been very profitable. So much so that they did a restructuring, and they had to freeze shares because the value of the membership shares was getting so high. They were having trouble getting new members in at the new membership price. So they changed that, and now they're looking at expanding their operations, their seed cleaning facilities that serve smaller farms across that region, and also they're doing historical kind of more tourism oriented services. And I think they're a great story of success, almost unanticipated how successful they were. So it's not impossible to knock it out of the park with these kinds of initiatives. You can look at Local Investing YYC. Local Investing YYC's had success in multiple raises now, and they're investing in businesses in Calgary. And I believe they're providing like more of along the lines of kind of micro loans, not so micro anymore, but they're using offering memorandum raises to raise millions of dollars to put into kind of social enterprise businesses that they're inspired by in Calgary with some success. Those are a number of examples, and there's a lot more out there.
Awesome. Excellent. We've got time for a few more questions. Rob asks in the chat for some recommendations for organizations that can help with our startup costs. I'll take a quick plug on this one. Cooperatives First, of course, does all of our work at no cost because we're funded by Federated Co-op to do this work. I'd also recommend that for some of your startup costs, the Cooperators Insurance is currently accepting applications to their co-op development program, which is a grant for co-ops all across Canada for up to $20,000 in matching funds for your startup costs. Elliot, Corinne, any other recommendations on sources of funds for the startup process?
Corinne might be a better source. I'm not working as much on that side.
Yeah, I mean, I was always going to suggest Prairies Canada. It's a bit more of a bit complicated only because it's usually a matching grant, but I find them fairly receptive. Yeah.
Yeah. Some of your provincial co-op associations also will have some grant monies available. I know a few of the clients we've worked with have gotten some funds from the Manitoba Co-op Association, for example. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. I'm not seeing any more in the chat. No one's waving frantically at me, so I'm going to go to my list. If there's municipalities that are considering starting a community investment cooperative, maybe they're facing challenges like the one you mentioned in Water Valley, what are some things you'd like to share with them to help them make a decision one way or the other?
Well, you're going to have to take a look, first of all, as to what the relationship between the municipality and the investment co-op can be, because I know there are some restrictions in the Municipal Governance Act around municipalities making investments. So you're going to want to iron that out, I would say, first of all. But if as a leader in a municipality, I mean, the most important part, I think, is leadership, is identifying leaders in your community that have the capacity to take this on. It's not the easiest of tasks. It requires a little bit of a go-getter, but also somebody willing to learn some of the more arcane aspects, at least well enough to navigate a conversation when it comes to securities laws and regulations, and things like fiduciary responsibilities of boards of directors, et cetera. But if you can identify those leaders and you can identify opportunities, that's the start for me, and make sure that, if you're an economic development officer in a municipality, or you have those conversations, let's socialize, what are the needs and what are the opportunities in our community? Like, let's get a handle on that. And then we'll find a way, we can find a way to raise the capital. And I want everybody to leave this meeting understanding that money is out there. Often money is not actually, we focus on it. Sometimes we fixate on it as the biggest problem, but actually often it's having figured out what the opportunity is. What is the need and what is the opportunity? If you figure that out, often the money can come. You will be surprised where it comes from. You may not be able to identify where it is now, but I can promise you there's a lot of it out there, and it's looking for a home. It's looking for a responsible manager, and it's looking for some reasonable return. And if you can add those things together with community benefit, which a co-op is totally oriented towards in the model, then you can have a really successful enterprise. But I think that's where those conversations need to start. And I think municipalities are very well positioned because they already have some leaders there, or should have. And they should then be able to identify those other opportunities and needs in the community and start having those conversations, even if it's an indirect role, finding those groups and finding those venues to have conversations, because often it's really a lack of socializing these needs and concerns. But once you get people in the room, a lot of people agree, and a lot of people will be willing to put in a little bit of effort. And if they don't have effort, they might have money. So yeah, that's where I think it's a good start.
Awesome. Fantastic tips, I would say. Lots of good chats as well happening in the chat function. If you have a minute, scroll through there. There's some good tips being shared. But that brings us to the end of today's session. I want to thank everyone for attending, and especially to those of you who asked some questions. Definitely big thanks to Corinne and Elliot for sharing your expertise and advice. I'll be in touch in a few days with the recording. In the interim, if folks have any questions, please feel free to reach out to the three of us. And if you've got a co-op idea, you need some support, by all means, we're here to help you move your ideas forward. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and early wishes as we head into the weekend. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.